Not all inheritance comes in the form of a surname or a will. Sometimes it is left on the side of the road, locked with a padlock and shrouded in silence. Rachel just wanted some peace that morning, a walk, some air, maybe to forget for a few minutes the feeling of loneliness that urban life insists on pushing upon us. But what she found was a suitcase, abandoned, heavy, and mysteriously closed. It looked like something out of a movie, and it was, except that the script was written by real life, and by someone who knew her name before she even knew where she came from. Do you think this is just a coincidence? What if I told you that this suitcase was not forgotten? It was left behind, that inside it there was more than money, that it contained secrets, false identities, a gun, and a letter written by a woman who claimed to be her biological mother. Yes, I know, it seems exaggerated, but this story is true, and the most surprising thing, all of this was directly linked to Rachel's origins, and to a past that they tried to bury. Many people would have run, many people would have remained silent, but Rachel did what few would. She faced her own story, and what she discovered could change the way you see destiny, choices, and even who you are. Want to know what was in that suitcase? Stay with me until the end. This story isn't just about secrets, it's about courage, purpose, and the kind of revelation that changes everything. The morning had started out lazy, like so many others when Rachel sought refuge in her own steps, walking between thoughts and silence. The wind whispered old memories, and the sun played among the leaves as if distracted by the small details of life. This was another one of those solitary walks in which the soul asks for affection, for kindness, for a little peace, even if disguised as routine. Rachel liked these moments because there, in the midst of solitude, she could find a thread of understanding about herself. But it was when she rounded the bend in the old dirt road that her eyes met something unusual. A suitcase. Abandoned, disheveled, mysteriously out of place. There was no one around, nor any sign of hurry. The suitcase lay there, motionless, like a secret that whispered, "Come here." And it was there, at the exact point between curiosity and fear, that Rachel's heart beat faster. She approached with measured steps, as if she could awaken something around her. The zipper was secured with a padlock, and this only increased the aura of suspense surrounding it all. No label, no clues, just the suitcase. And the feeling. That fate had thrown a random bait. Rachel, who had always been driven by compassion, felt something strange. It wasn't just the suitcase itself. It was the loneliness she carried, the abandonment stamped there. Who loses a suitcase, she thought. And why right here? There was a touch of inspiration there, as if the universe was asking her to take action, and the action required courage. The courage that manifests itself when something inside you tells you that it's not for nothing. That's how she, still, between insecurity and impulse, decided to sit next to the suitcase, like someone waiting for an old friend to arrive. She didn't know it, but there began an adventure greater than any other she had ever experienced. In time, the wind changed, as if blowing secrets in her direction. Rachel remembered the stories of her grandfather, who always said that nothing that crosses our path arrives by chance. Those words echoed like wise prophecies. What if that suitcase was a metaphor for life? Closed, enigmatic, asking for a closer look, a more gentle listening. It was not just an object, it was an invitation. They called for empathy, for respect for the unknown, for the humanity hidden in every unrevealed detail. The suitcase at that moment became a symbol of what she herself felt inside, locked, carrying memories, and yet waiting to be opened with love. It was as if the elements of nature, the sound of the leaves, the rustling of the birds, even the warmth of the sun, were telling her, "Rachel, you are not alone." And there, between doubts and small flashes of hope, she realized, maybe it wasn't her who found the suitcase. Maybe it was the suitcase that found Rachel. Rachel tried to go on with her life as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. The suitcase seemed to have a life of its own, calling her silently, with that silent and at the same time deafening presence. It was there, in the corner of the room, motionless, but causing a whirlwind. It was as if it held not only secrets, but also forgotten fragments of Rachel's own existence. With each furtive glance, curiosity grew like a weed in her heart, insistent, stubborn. There was something about that object that awakened old feelings, the longing for something she had never experienced, the desire to find meaning in small things, the fear of touching the unknown. The feeling was similar to facing a locked door in the middle of the desert. You don't know what's on the other side, but you know you have to open it. And in that tension between reason and impulse, Rachel was invaded by a force that only those who have been hooked by hope and courage know. In the early evening, she tried to distract herself. She made some tea, lit a scented candle, put on an instrumental playlist in the background, but it was no use. The suitcase seemed to breathe. Every creak in the house, every wind that blew through the window seemed like a call to action. Rachel, who had always been sensitive to the subtleties of life, knew that it wasn't just about satisfying an impulse. It was something deeper, more visceral. A feeling that locked object carried more than just belongings, perhaps emotions, stories, a disguised cry for help. Compassion blossomed without her realizing it. It was no longer about what's inside, but rather, why did this come to me? It was one of those questions that we don't formulate with words but feel in our hearts. The suitcase, in its silent presence, awakened in her a sense of emotional responsibility, of reconciliation with her own past. And this feeling was too great to be ignored. It was in the silence of the early morning, when even thoughts slumber, that Rachel decided to act. She grabbed the pliers from the drawer, the same rusty ones she kept for domestic emergencies, and went back into the living room. Her heart was pounding, not with fear but with reverence. She wasn't just breaking a padlock, she was crossing an invisible boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The metallic snap of the broken padlock seemed to echo through the room like a sacred thunder, but she didn't open the suitcase. Not yet. She left it there, resting on the table, as if respecting a portal that could not yet be crossed. She stared at it for long minutes, immersed in an ocean of doubts, feelings, and possibilities. Whatever was there, it would change everything. And Rachel felt this with the instinctive wisdom of someone who knows the power that certain moments carry. There was a new weight in the air, and something inside her knew there was no going back. The zipper slid slowly, as if time itself were hesitant to reveal what was about to emerge. Rachel, with trembling hands and ragged breathing, opened the suitcase with the same care one might unwrap a delicate memory. But what she saw was no memory at all. It was shock. Stacks and stacks of money stacked in firm bundles tied with rubber bands perfectly aligned, high-value bills, countless. Beside them, a folder with documents that at first glance seemed genuine, but something about the names, the photos, the stamps screamed forgery. An old, outdated cell phone was there too, uncharged yet with a suspicious aura. And finally, a gun. Cold, metallic, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Rachel recoiled as if she had touched fire. Was all of this real? Her entire body reacted with fear, but her mind plunged into an abyss of insecurity. She felt like a character in a crime movie, but this story was now hers. The first impulse was to scream, then to run, then to hide everything. Rachel felt the weight of the entire world in her hands. The suitcase, which had previously carried only curiosity, now seemed to contain a destiny. One that she had not asked for, had not sought, but which was there. Her conscience was divided into two paths, each more tortuous: to hand everything over to the police and perhaps become involved in an endless plot, or to keep quiet, to try to convince herself that the universe, for some reason, wanted to give her a chance. A second chance? A temptation? No one prepares us for decisions like that. Her heart was beating faster than her thoughts could process. The wisdom of life seemed to have gone silent for a moment. The suitcase offered more than money. It offered power, but also fear, also responsibility. And Rachel, amidst the avalanche of thoughts, realized how much loneliness weighed at that moment. There was no one to ask, to advise, to share that burden, only her and the moral dilemma. She sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, trying to find a thread of understanding in the midst of that chaos. The money shone, seductive. The possibilities began to parade through her mind like dangerous promises, paying off debts, changing her life, helping other people, doing good with it. The power of kindness, maybe, but at what cost? Rachel knew what starts wrong rarely ends well. The deleted messages on her cell phone said more than any words. Someone tried to cover their tracks. The gun, it was a cry of warning. That suitcase belonged to a world she didn't know, a world where love might not have a place, where hope was traded with bullets. And there, lying on the floor alone with her doubts, Rachel cried. She cried for the unasked-for responsibility, for the temptation, for the inner confusion, and for the courage she knew she would need to have to choose. Because in the end, some choices can't be undone, and she was about to make one. Rachel tried to rationalize her decision, like someone trying to hold back a river with their hands. Just for a few days, she told herself, just to understand better. But anyone who has faced choices involving fear, morality, and hope knows that time does not walk alongside us. It flows inside us like a silent avalanche. She hid her suitcase in the back closet, among old boxes and forgotten memories. But hiding it did not bring peace, it brought weight. With every knock on the door, every noise at the gate, a cold current ran through her spine. Insecurity grew, spreading like a shadow at the end of the afternoon. In the first few days, everything seemed the same, but soon the silence began to change tone. Unknown people began to walk along the street, cars with tinted windows parked for too long, and that uncomfortable feeling of being watched began to accompany her like a faithful shadow. Her instinct screamed. Something was wrong, very wrong. On a cloudy afternoon, when the sky seemed to share her anguish, her old cell phone rang. Rachel was washing the dishes, distracted, when she heard that dry metallic sound coming from the box of her suitcase. For a moment, everything froze. Water ran down the dishes, but she could hear nothing but the insistent ringing. The screen flickered with an unknown number, a number that did not belong to this time, to this reality. Rachel did not answer. She could not. She remained paralyzed, as if the call were a call from destiny or a trap. After 3 rings, the phone went silent. But the echo of that sound remained trapped in the air, like a secret not yet revealed. That night, she did not sleep. She thought about calling someone. She thought about running away. She thought about disappearing with everything. But she realized, with a pain that only the wise feel, that there was no way to escape from herself. And now, she and that suitcase were irremediably intertwined. The following hours were marked by a state of alertness she had never experienced before. Every noise became a threat. Every glance on the street seemed like a hidden code. Rachel began to notice details that would have gone unnoticed before. A woman wearing a hat who was walking without her dog. A man who walked around the block for no clear reason. The kindness of her neighbors turned into distrust. The compassion she carried in her chest gave way to a knot of anxiety. And inside her, a conflict began to form. Between keeping the secret and protecting herself. Between seeking the truth and maintaining security. The suitcase now was a physical and spiritual weight. The silence of the house seemed to roar, and Rachel felt, with a mixture of fear and clarity, that her choice would cost her dearly. Because there are times in life when the price of omission is greater than that of action. And deep down she knew the time for doubt was running out. Rachel, overcome by an impulse that mixed courage with desperation, decided to turn on her old cell phone. She used a spare battery from her brother's phone, one of those that fix everything, and waited for the device to come to life. The screen flickered as if waking from a long sleep, full of the past. There weren't many files visible. Almost everything had been deleted. Almost. Rummaging through the folders with trembling fingers and a racing heart, she found some traces, like footprints in the sand before the tide came in. a folder of short videos, photos, and some saved messages. But what made her blood run cold wasn't the content itself. It was the face. There in the images was a woman who moved, smiled, spoke, and who looked absurdly like her. No ordinary resemblance. It was like looking at an alternative version of herself. Rachel felt understanding slip through her fingers. Was it a coincidence, or the echo of something deeper and more disturbing? The photos showed the woman, her disguised reflection, in different places. Airports, train stations, simple hotels, distant cities. In each image, a different expression, a different identity. In one, she was Clara. In another, Veronica. In yet another, she used documents with the name Helena. It was clear that she lived a double or triple or quadruple life, as if she were always running away from something. Or someone. Rachel was mesmerized. The messages, fragmented, spoke of escape, of last chance, of "I can't hide anymore." There was a short video recorded in a farewell mood. The woman, her mirror, looked directly into the camera and said, "If you're watching this, it's already too late." Rachel shivered. This was no longer just mystery. It was emotion. It was connection. It was as if her soul was being pulled into that story by an invisible magnet. She felt, with a lump in her throat, that everything was interconnected. With her, inside her, she began to question everything. What if it wasn't just a physical resemblance? What if there was a connection of blood, of past, of ancestry, or even something more inexplicable? Rachel had never met her maternal grandparents. Her mother had always been secretive about the family's past. The pieces began to fit together like a puzzle without a manual. It was as if each element in that suitcase, the money, the documents, the cell phone, the gun, told the story of someone who lived on the margins in search of freedom, perhaps redemption. And now, this story had fallen into her lap, not by chance but by destiny. It was impossible not to think about reconciliation, about forgiveness, about everything that remains buried by fear, shame, or love. Rachel felt the weight of an invisible inheritance, a painful adventure, marked by choices of survival. And deep down, like an ember hidden amidst the ashes, inspiration began to emerge. What if what was happening was not about running away, but about awakening? The atmosphere around Rachel changed. It was no longer just uneasiness, it was persecution. The world, once grey and monotonous, now seemed charged with hidden intentions. The corners gained shapes, the faces became suspicious. She felt she was being followed, watched with unblinking eyes. And the suitcase? The suitcase seemed to radiate a strange energy, as if calling back whoever had lost it, or hidden it. Rachel no longer slept well, nor did she feel safe, even inside her home. The hope that had once guided her was replaced by a burning fear, and with it, the courage of someone who knows that running away is no longer an option. She needed to act, find out who this woman was, what she was carrying, why she seemed so absurdly connected to her own existence. The questions multiplied, like echoes in a dark cave, and deep down Rachel felt whatever was behind all this, it was rooted in her origin. Determined not to be just a spectator of her own destiny, she began to investigate on her own. She went back to the videos, analyzed details of the scene, license plates, names on papers. She began to put together a map with the locations mentioned. In the deleted messages she managed to recover. Each clue was a step closer to the truth, but also a step closer to danger. Her cell phone rang frequently, always from different numbers, always silent on the other end. One afternoon a message arrived. "This isn't yours, return it before it's too late." Kindness gave way to survival instinct. The compassion she had previously felt for that mystery was now directed at herself. She needed to protect herself. She sought out a private investigator, someone trustworthy, discreet, who knew the tortuous paths of the city's backstage, and together they began to search for the woman's trail. But the deeper Rachel delved, the more she realized, perhaps this persecution wasn't just physical, perhaps it was spiritual as well. The names on the false documents began to appear in old records. People linked to a sophisticated criminal network, specialized in money laundering and identity theft. But there was more, much more. One of the identities used a surname that Rachel knew well. It was her mother's maiden name. And it was as if the ground had fallen out from under her feet. Suddenly everything took on a new dimension. It wasn't just a suitcase, it was a key piece in a story that spanned generations. Rachel felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, but also a strange gratitude. Gratitude for finally seeing beyond the curtain that had covered her entire life. Maybe the woman was an aunt, a half-sister, maybe even her biological mother. The hypotheses danced in her mind like indecipherable shadows, and now, racing against time, she had to find the truth before someone silenced her. Because the feeling of being hunted was no longer just paranoia, it was reality. And Rachel knew the next choice could be fatal. It was by chance, or maybe not. Rachel, exhausted after yet another sleepless night, decided to rummage through her suitcase more carefully, as if searching for meaning between the lines of pain. She touched the inner fabric carefully and noticed a discreet relief, a hand-sewn tear. She used a small pair of scissors to open the lining, and there, between the fabric and the leather, she found a yellowed envelope, folded with almost sacred care. Her name handwritten made her shiver. To Rachel. The world stopped for a few seconds. Her hands were sweating, her eyes filled with tears before she even read the first line. The handwriting was firm, delicate, and it began like this. If you are reading this, it is because life somehow brought us together. It was a letter, a confession, a hug in the form of words, and in it, the woman who wrote it said she was her biological mother. Rachel didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. All she knew was that that letter was tearing her apart inside. The words in the letter had the tone of someone who lived between love and fear. It spoke of a hidden pregnancy, an escape, a forced surrender. I never stopped thinking about you, my girl, it said, but the world I lived in was too dark to take you with me. The woman narrated a life marked by escapes, false names, choices made out of fear, but also with a sincere desire for protection. She explained that the suitcase was not lost, it was left, deliberately, for Rachel. When everything was ready, when she was ready. It was the last resort, the last chance for reconciliation, and also a request for forgiveness. Rachel felt a torrent of emotions that could not fit in her chest. Affection, anger, tenderness, incomprehension, all at the same time. She read and reread each passage, trying to absorb years of silence in minutes. And there, with the letter pressed to her chest, she felt that for the first time she was being seen in her entirety. She remained there for hours, sitting on the floor as if starting over from scratch. The letter smelled of the past, but spoke with the voice of the present. That woman, whom she had never met but had always missed, was no longer a mystery. She was part of her. Rachel remembered the times when she had felt a nameless emptiness, the feeling of being out of place. Now everything made sense. It was as if someone had shined a flashlight in the darkness and said, "You came from here." She cried like a child, but not from sadness, from relief, from belated understanding. The suitcase, once a symbol of conflict, was now a reliquary, and the letter a key. She still didn't know what she would do with the money, the gun, the secrets. But one thing was certain. The suitcase was not a trap. It was a gesture of love. And there, behind the pain, was a call to something much greater, something she still needed to understand. Rachel never imagined that investigating her own birth would be like pulling the thread of a web that spanned decades. The letter lit a flame that could no longer be extinguished. She began searching for old documents, certificates, registry files, medical records. What she found was a thick fog, changed names, conflicting dates, torn out pages. And the more she searched, the more she realized that her adoption story was shrouded in silence and half-truths. She spoke to a distant aunt who hesitated a lot before speaking. But between tears and long pauses, the revelation came. Her biological mother was not an ordinary person. She was an undercover agent, acting under a false identity. involved in missions that crossed borders and laws. Rachel was paralyzed. It was like discovering that her whole life had been a play, with her in the lead role, without knowing the script. Gratitude for the truth mixed with the weight of a new identity. She was not just a daughter, she was the heir to a story that no one dared to tell. The fragments of stories began to paint a dangerous past. Her mother had worked for an unofficial organization, an intelligence cell that fought international criminal networks. The mission she carried out was as delicate as it was lethal, and at some point in the operation, she was betrayed, pregnant, on the run. And in the midst of the chaos, she decided to hide her daughter, protect her from a world where love, kindness, and hope were often sacrificed in the name of justice. Rachel discovered that she had been adopted by a hand-picked couple, ordinary but trustworthy people. Her peaceful childhood, her simple dreams, her love for books and walks, all of this had been carefully constructed to keep her away from danger. But now, with the suitcase open, the letter read and the truth exposed, the past could no longer be buried. She felt a new strength in her chest, a kind of calling, as if the story had never ended, as if her mother's legacy was waiting to be completed. Rachel began to see signs everywhere. Fragments of clues left in the videos, encrypted notes, names that reappeared. This was not a coincidence. It was a transferred mission, disguised as coincidence. She began to dream of faces she did not recognize. She woke up with phrases engraved in her mind, memories that seemed not to be hers, or maybe they were. And when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw herself just as a woman in search of answers, but as someone chosen to continue an interrupted journey. She knew she was being tested by life, by destiny, by the very humanity that she carried in her gaze. It was an invitation to courage, humility, and active compassion. And even though she felt fear, she knew she could not ignore it. The blood of the woman who gave birth to her ran through her, and with it a trace of determination, resilience, and struggle. The past had been unearthed, yes, but what Rachel didn't know yet was that what lay ahead would require more than truth. It would require purpose. Rachel knew there was a point of no return, and she had crossed that point days ago. It was no longer possible to run away, not only from the enemies that emerged from the shadows, but from herself, from the truth that now burned like a living flame in the center of her chest. The girl who walked alone listening to music was now a woman on a mission. With the money from her suitcase, she hired a team of digital security experts, got her own documents, ways to move discreetly, escape routes. But it wasn't escape she was looking for, it was infiltration. She wanted to understand, unmask, reveal. She knew her mother had died without seeing the mission completed, and now it was hers. It was the burden and the present. The mission was more than revenge. It was an act of love, a settling of accounts between past and future, an attempt at reparation. Rachel looked in the mirror and saw another woman. Afraid, yes, but filled with the confidence of someone who will no longer back down. The names began to emerge more clearly. Old bigwigs from the corporate underworld, people too powerful to make headlines but too dirty to remain hidden. Men who had silenced her mother, who had moved her suitcase as a pawn in a covert operation, and who now feared the truth coming out. Rachel learned quickly. It was as if her mother's DNA pulsed through her at critical moments. Tough decisions, reading intentions, emotional intelligence. She made herself invisible where she needed to be, but left calculated trails where she wanted to be noticed. She sent copies of the letter, videos of her wife, secret documents to investigative journalists in several states. She was planting seeds of truth, and truth, when well sown, blooms even on asphalt. The compassion she had for her mother was now turning into strength. It wasn't about cold revenge, it was about justice with wisdom, because there are battles that are not won with weapons, but with the courage to illuminate what many prefer to keep in the shadows. And so Rachel entered that dark world with the kindness of someone who knows that wounds do not heal with more pain, but also with the firmness of someone who refuses to be used or silenced. She learned codes, faced dilemmas, almost gave up. But there was always something, a memory, a phrase from the letter, the look of someone who helped her along the way, that kept her going. She discovered secret files, compromising conversations, and in a short time, she was more than a shadow on the criminal's radar. She was a real risk. They tried to find her, to silence her, but she was one step ahead. The money in the suitcase did not buy luxuries. It bought time, freedom, information. And Rachel, with a humility forged in the fire of pain, understood that her life would never be the same again. But now there was purpose, and this purpose fed something in her that even in the midst of chaos remained unshakable. The hope that truth, sooner or later, always finds its way. Always. Rachel did not emerge unscathed, but she emerged whole. She won the battle not by shouting, but with the silent firmness of someone who understood that true power does not lie in strength. It lies in wisdom. There were no trophies, no headlines, and no applause, but there was peace, peace of soul, and that is priceless. The suitcase, which one day appeared as an enigma, became a symbol, not of wealth, but of awakening. With part of the money, she changed her life. She traveled, started over, left behind the old facade. But she used most of it to do what her mother could never do: seek justice. She created a foundation to help victims of forced disappearances, silenced women, families living in the shadow of the truth. She used the power that life gave her to spread love, reconciliation, kindness, and inspiration, because she understood that it is not enough to survive. You have to transform trauma into a path, fear into movement, pain into purpose. She returned to the road where it all began, months later, as if revisiting the beginning of a dream. The place looked the same, but Rachel didn't. She sat down where she had first spotted the suitcase. She took a deep breath. She closed her eyes. She smiled. Life had given her a gift disguised as a problem, a portal disguised as a burden, and at that moment, she recognized with gratitude everything she had been looking for had always been inside her. Courage, compassion, hope, forgiveness. All these words that had once seemed too big now fit perfectly into her daily life. The suitcase had been left for her, but what she did with what was inside was her choice, and that choice changed everything. Discovering her origins was only the first layer. The real discovery was discovering who she could be, who she already was. And with that legacy, Rachel decided to move forward, not as a victim of history, but as the author of a new destiny. Today, when people ask her about her past, Rachel smiles sweetly and with a touch of mystery. She doesn't tell everything. Some truths, she learned, need to be kept in the respectful silence of memory. But she speaks of the importance of empathy, understanding, and humanity, of the value of not judging what you don't understand, of looking beyond appearances. She teaches young people, listens to stories, and supports impactful initiatives. She has become a reference, not because of fame, but because of coherence, because of the way she lives what she believes. And when she looks back, she feels no resentment. She feels purpose. Because the greatest discovery in that suitcase was not the wads of cash, nor the secrets, nor the hidden weapon. It was the reminder that we are all bearers of stories that we did not choose, but that we can decide how they will end. And Rachel, with her head held high, continues writing hers, with love, with humility, with courage, and with the power of kindness, which in the end is always the key that opens all locks. Now tell me, what if it were you? If this suitcase appeared in your path, what would you do? Would you ignore it? Would you call the police? Or would you have the courage to open it, even knowing that maybe inside you would find much more than you expected, maybe even truths about yourself that no one has ever had the courage to tell? Rachel's story shows us something that many people avoid admitting. Sometimes life puts the impossible right in front of us, not as a punishment, but as an invitation to wake up, to reconnect with our origins, to discover what we are truly made of. What about you? Have you been running away from your own suitcase? Have you been avoiding looking at the past, at what hurts, at what still needs to be healed? Maybe what you are looking for most is not something new, but the courage to face what is already there, inside you. And if this story inspired you, share it with someone who also needs to remember that it is still possible to rewrite their own destiny. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications and follow us, because here you won't just hear stories, you'll experience transformations.